All right, let's come back to the issue of politics and looking at the fallout of coalitions in various municipalities in the country. We're now joined via Zoom by Professor Daryl Glaser, who's a professor of political studies at Wits University, to weigh in on the state of coalition governments in the country. Prof, a warm welcome to you. Thank you very much for joining us here on SABC News, sir.
Pleasure to join you.
All right, let's start here. I mean, on the surface, it looks as though the issue of coalitions is problematic because, we're seeing very many egos at play here. But that surely can't be the only stumbling block at play here. What are we dealing with? What are the big problems here?
I think behind the problem of egos is the problem of the fact that we don't have ideologically coherent and stable coalitions, and we've got lots of small parties which are often very opportunistic, like the Patriotic Alliance, which will make themselves available, as it were, to the highest political bidder. So, functioning at their best, coalition governments can provide an inclusive form of government and a highly stable form of government. But unfortunately, in South Africa, we've got a situation where the two natural coalitions, if you like, that could anchor local government have been quite difficult to form. One would be a kind of a broad center coalition between the DA and the ANC, and the other would be a kind of broad left coalition between the ANC and the EFF. Now, some such coalition may be in the offing in the future, but at the moment we're dealing with a situation where sometimes even those combinations don't get you over the 50% plus one, and so you have to rely on small parties which often lack any kind of clear ideological purpose. They're vehicles for individuals or small groups of people who are simply trying to access power. So, people talk about how nice it would be to have more independent standing in politics or being successful. But I think this is a foretaste of some of the dangers associated with a fragmented political scene where you've got lots of tiny individuals or parties that are making too much of a difference and that are too easily persuaded to abandon one coalition and join another.
Yeah. And I mean, you talk about the issue of ideologies, and this is something that I've always battled with. We find a situation where sometimes, you have two parties who simply don't agree on anything ideologically on print. There's just nothing that they have in common. I'll use the example of the DA and the EFF, for example, who would then go into a coalition. And one sits there and wonders, what are they going to agree on? What will they agree on? How will they even get along? Is that also something that's becoming evident as one of the main issues here?
No, I think it's absolutely central. You see, I think part of the problem is that a lot of the country is sick and tired of the ANC, and a lot of the political parties who've been criticizing the ANC perceive that there would be political risk for themselves to go into any kind of alliance with the ANC. So up until recently, we've had a situation where you've had anyone but the ANC coalitions, and those anyone but the ANC coalitions have been extremely ideologically disparate and unstable. So as I say, the more natural coalitions, ideologically speaking, the more potentially coherent ones would be where the ANC allies either to its right with the DA or to its left, or in the sort of black nationalist left with the EFF. If those two on their own could get over the 50% mark, you could have a highly stable coalition. But if they don't, then, as I say, you're going to still rely on small parties. And I think this is just something we're going to have to get used to, because we've got a highly inclusive form of proportional representation. That means it's very, very easy to get into the local assemblies, or in future to get into the National Assembly. So what we're seeing now as a problem could be reproduced at national level, unless either the DA and the ANC or the EFF and the ANC find some way to work together to form the kind of stable core of a broader coalition.
Yeah, I'm sure you're watching what's playing out in Tshwane at the moment. Tensions there in Council Tshwane, metro politics, of course, being in the spotlight at the moment. Yesterday, we heard a representative from the EFF as well as a representative from ATM saying that, we're not going to continue with, a mayor from the DA. That's not going to continue. How do you see all of this sort of playing out? Because they've really kind of drawn some sort of enemy lines, although we know in politics, there's no permanent enemies or permanent friends anyway. But how do you see this all sort of playing out in the end?
Well, in the end, at one level, you could say it's quite a good thing that there are no permanent enemies and friends, insofar as parties who are supposedly, revolutionaries on the one side and counter-revolutionaries on the other, or at opposite ends of the political spectrum, who could potentially be at fisticuffs, are having to bargain and trade. But unfortunately, there is, and that potentially helps to stabilize politics. But unfortunately, the results of this kind of bargaining and trading until now has been very unfortunate, has been lamentable. We haven't seen coherent local government. So I'm afraid this is something we're going to have to get used to. I do think that ultimately, as I say, you'll have to have a government of either the broad center or the broad left stabilizing coalitions at local and later at national level in South Africa, in order to be able to reap the benefits, the inclusiveness benefits and the stabilizing benefits of coalition government. There's nothing wrong with coalition government per se, but it needs to be underpinned by a certain amount of ideological coherence and a certain amount of what we have too little of, which is principle.
Yeah, and these tensions, do they sort of play, play out well for the ANC? I mean, I would assume that the ANC does rely on the fact that there will be these sort of tensions. I mean, we're looking at a situation now where it seems that, the ANC does want power back in some of the biggest metros. And it looks like this is, what's happening when we find these tensions with some of the other parties who simply cannot make these coalitions work.
Yeah, well, ideologically unstable coalitions, in other words, coalitions between very ideologically disparate groups, they will be easy for outsiders to try and interfere in and break up, no matter what the coalition, if they're ideologically unstable or if they consist of lots of opportunists or both. It's going to be very easy for outsiders to come in and divide and rule, to break them up. But then those parties that have succeeded in undoing a previous coalition are then going to have a problem forming a coalition themselves. So, you can derive short-term tactical benefits from destabilizing a coalition. What's not clear is that there's any alternative coalition in the waiting in many of these places that can govern in a more stable way.
All right. Prof, thank you very much for your input. We certainly do appreciate it here on SABC News, sir.
That's a pleasure.
All right, that's Professor Daryl Glaser, Professor of Political Studies at Wits University, weighing in on the state of coalition governments in the country.